Welcome, everyone, to Spiritual Geography of the Land of Israel. Tonight, we're going to look at some of the unique geographical elements of the land of Israel. And then we're going to try to dig very, very deep into the spiritual significance. And this is the area we're going to talk about is that we mentioned already, that the Dead Sea or the Salt Sea is literally the lowest place on the face of the earth, meaning below sea level. It is 430 to 440 meters below sea level, which is approximately 1,400 to 1,440 feet below sea level. As I said, it is the lowest place on Earth. And we're going to try to understand the whole story that's connected to this. But what we have to see is that this place where the Dead Sea is the lowest place, this is what's called in secular geography, the Syrian African Rift. It runs for 6,000 miles from Turkey all the way down to Mozambique, meaning there are two plates that are separating. One is called the Arabian Plate. That's to the east. And to the west is divided by the Syrian African Rift. It runs all the way to Africa, all the way down to Mozambique. And what it has created are deep valleys surrounded at times by very tall mountains. Lakes have formed in this rift that runs all the way 6,000 miles. In Israel, it runs all the ways from Eilat, all the ways up to the north of Israel. In the north is the Sea of Galilee. The Sea of Galilee is also, in Hebrew, Yam Kinneret, is also below sea level. Yam Kinneret is 210 to 215 meters below sea level, approximately 685 feet to 705 feet. So in other words, from the Dead Sea to the Yam Kinneret, it is going up, but still Yam Kinneret is substantially under sea level. From Yam Kinneret, then it goes up to what we call the Upper Galilee, and that's where the Chula Valley is. And then at the top of the Chula Valley is where we have the north of Israel, southern Lebanon, very hilly, mountainous, and that's where there is Mount Hermon. Much of this we will review. But Mount Hermon is Mount Hermon is part of a whole mountain range. The part that Israel is part of Israel is approximately 1,208 meters, which is almost 4,000 feet. But I'm sorry, that was a different one. I'm sorry. We do it again. It's 2,236 meters, which is 7,336 feet high. So that's a substantial mountain. It commands, we'll talk more about Mount Hermon. It commands the whole north of Israel. It's snow-capped. There's skiing on the top. But the Syrian part is even higher, is 2,800 meters, rising to around 9,200 feet. So it's a substantial mountain range. Israel's reaches around 7,336 feet. When there was a war in Syria to get rid of Assad, and since it was so unclear, Israel did move into the Syrian part of the Hermon in order to set up a buffer zone to protect Israel. And Israel is still there to this day. They're negotiating what exactly will happen on that northern border. So having said all that, that's just so we can get an idea, because we're going to be concentrating on the Dead Sea. But again, we have to know that from Eilat all the ways up to northern Israel, there is this rift called in Hebrew, it's the Jordan Valley, because from Yam Kinneret all the ways to the Dead Sea is the Jordan River is running, and that's the border basically between Jordan and Israel. And the Dead Sea, on the other side of the Dead Sea is Jordan, on our side is Israel. So that's the picture here now. So we want to understand the spiritual significance of the Dead Sea being the lowest place on the earth. And to do that, we have to look at the story of what happened in Sodom and Gomorrah. When Avram and Lot came to Israel, so in Parshat Lech Lecha, it says that there were arguments between the servants, the workers, the shepherds of Lot and the shepherds of Avram. Now remember, Lot is the nephew of Abraham, and Avram, when his father died, Avram took him under his wing, and he came to Israel with Avram and Sarah. But they weren't at least the shepherds weren't getting along. They both had huge herds of sheep. And so Avram said, this is in Parshat Lech Lecha, we're brothers, let's not fight. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. In other words, Avram, as we've learned many times, is chesed. And so he's trying to work out a family dispute in the most peaceful way possible. So the Torah says that Lot looked, and he looked towards the Dead Sea area, which was Sodom, and he saw that it was like the garden of God. It was beautiful, it was green, it was fertile, and he chose, that's where I'll go. And Avram said, fine. So Lot went to Sodom. So what's important here is he chose it because it was green and fertile. So then in the next Parsha, Vayera, when the three angels came to Avram to announce that he and Sarah would have a son, one of the angels, though, was on his way to Sodom to let them know that the people of Sodom were, to this day, the expression of, calling Sodom and Gomorrah means very, very evil people. And so this angel was coming to tell Lot that he should leave Sodom because it was going to be overturned. So we're not going to tell the whole story, but the angels come to Sodom, and one of the laws of Sodom is you couldn't have guests. There was no home hospitality. And so Lot takes in the angels. People come and they want to attack Lot, attack the strangers, he tells them, you need to flee with your family because tomorrow God is going to overturn Sodom. What happens is most of his family did not believe him. And in the morning, only Lot and his wife and two daughters took it seriously, and they began to flee from Sodom. And then the Torah says that God rained down on them fire and sulfur from heaven, and that the entire Sodom area collapsed, and the wife, I'm just telling the story now, we're going to go back to it in a deep way. And it says that Lot's wife, she was warned not to look behind you as you're fleeing. In other words, at the destruction. She looks behind her, and it says she turned into a pillar of salt. How we understand that is not 100% clear, whether it's symbolic, whether she was affected by the destruction that was happening. Even though we assume that what is happening is a major earthquake. Now, how was the African-Syrian rift in the first place? It was because the two tectonic plates are moving apart, and that makes it, throughout all of history to this day, a ripe place for earthquakes. The Jordan Valley is it's a known place. In fact, there are earthquakes there all the time, but they're small and minor. But there's always the danger of another major earthquake. For those who know Jewish history, so the city of Tzfat sits very close to the Jordan Valley, and it was destroyed 2 times by earthquakes. Literally, the entire town collapsed. The last one was in, I think, 1836. And before that, there was somewhere in the 1700s, major earthquakes. These were stone houses. They had no real, call it earthquake protection. And the whole town collapsed. In fact, if you go to Tzfat to this day, especially in the old city, there is still rubble from almost 200 years ago. There's still parts of the old city that have not been reclaimed. So that's the assumption of what happened here. Now, when you go up north, so the area around Lake Kinneret, so the most important city there is Tiberias, and it is incredibly fertile and green and beautiful, despite the fact that it's below sea level. So apparently, before this catastrophe happened at the time of Lot, also that part of the Jordan Valley was green and beautiful. Now it's all desert. There is some agriculture there, especially date palms. And now lately, grapevines. But it's very stark, beautiful, beautiful mountains. And on the other side of the Jordan, also you have mountains. So here you have the rift, the Jordan Valley, right in the middle. Okay, so I'm just going to tell the end of the story, and then we're going to try to understand on a deeper level here. So Lot and his daughters escape. His wife again turned into a pillar of salt. Whether we take that symbolically, it's not 100% clear. They escape to a cave. And the story says that the older daughter says to the younger daughter, they thought, and this is how the sages learn it, they thought the whole world had been destroyed. It was obviously a very traumatic event that happened there. And the older one said to the younger, said that there's no men left to perpetuate humanity. So we should feed our father wine, and we should sleep with him in order to perpetuate the human race. And that's what they did. They got him Lot drunk, and the first daughter slept with him. And then she said to her younger sister, I did it. Now it's your turn. And she slept with him. They got him drunk again. And they both became pregnant. And from the older daughter, she named her son Moav, which literally means from father. Me'av, Moav. And the younger daughter named her son Ammon. Now, these places are very, very famous in Jewish history. Moav and Ammon became whole nations in what we call Jordan today. So that's the basic story that we want to work with. But there's one more piece of the story and people who have been to Israel know this very well, from the Dead Sea. So again, on both sides are these huge cliffs. And if you go north, you're in the Jordan Valley the entire way. But if you go west, it's around, I didn't look up that fact, it's straight uphill for about almost a half an hour, and you arrive at Jerusalem. Meaning from Jerusalem to the Dead Sea is all downhill. If you look on the other side, and I know this well because anytime I go to Jerusalem, this is my reality. From the plains of Israel to get up to Jerusalem is also completely uphill. And this we talked about the first time, that here's the Mediterranean right here. Then you have the flat plains. And then the hills start going up all the ways to Jerusalem. And then they go all the ways down to the Dead Sea. So this is going to be very significant when we look at it spiritually. We're going from the lowest place on earth to what's considered the center of the world, Jerusalem. And in one of the prophecies, it's called how all the people are going to come up to the top of the mountain. Jerusalem is like considered, even though Jerusalem itself it's only 2,700 feet high. In the Rocky Mountains, that would be called the Bunny Hill. But in Jerusalem, to get to Jerusalem, whether it's from the east or the west, there's only one way, and that's up. And so that's very significant, that from the lowest place on earth, it's all up to Jerusalem, which is the center point, as we discussed in the first class. Okay, so now that we told the story, let's try to understand a little bit deeper. So first of all, we're told that from this incestuous relationship between the daughters of Lot and their father, two very important women were born in the lineage. One was Ruth. Ruth is the great-grandmother of King David. The other one was Naamah. She came from Moab. The other one was Naamah, who, of all the wives of King Solomon, he had 1,000 wives. She is really the only one who stands out. She became a righteous convert. Her name was Naamah. And the lineage of King David and King Solomon went through her. So here we have a story that we have touched on before. And that is that there are 3 incidences of the lineage leading to King David and ultimately to the Mashiach that came through very strange circumstances. The first one was Tamar and Yehuda, where, just for those who don't know the story, Yehuda had 3 sons. The first son married a woman named Tamar, and he died. And then the other brother married her, and he died. And so in those days, the third son was expected to marry Tamar, but he was young at the time. So to make a long story short, Tamar was considered a very righteous woman, and she had a prophetic sense that she had to bring kings into the world through the family of Yehuda. We know that David comes from Yehuda. The kings come from Yehuda. And so she dressed as a prostitute. She, call it, seduced Yehuda, who didn't know that it was his daughter-in-law. And from that comes Peretz, through who comes King David. And then we have the story with Lot and his daughters. And then the third story was with Ruth herself. It's not as scandalous, but nonetheless, she comes to Boaz in the middle of the night and sits at his feet and basically proposes to him that you should marry me. And he does. And according to tradition, they were together one night and he died. But from that one night comes King David. So here we have, if we're trying to understand the significance, the spiritual geography of going from the lowest place on earth to, in a certain way, the highest place, which is Jerusalem, spiritually. So here we see that from these relationships comes Mashiach. Well, when else did we have a major fall in history? Because that's what happened to Sodom and Gomorrah. It says that the whole fertile plain that was attached to this place called Sodom, everything collapses. And to this day, it's the salt sea. Everything happened, and it says God rained down from heaven sulfur. So the first fall was in the Garden of Eden. We talk about it as an exile. Adam and Eve were exiled from the Garden of Eden. And we know that Eve was, tricked by the snake. And we now know later that the gematria of Mashiach is the same gematria as the snake, Nachash. And so Mashiach is the fixing of the Nachash. So here, if we go back to Sodom, that whatever happened at Sodom, geographically, we end up with the lowest place on earth. And when we talk about the mission or the task of Mashiach, so one of the things that is talked about is that Mashiach is in order to nullify the snake. The snake represents all evil, the Yetzer Hara. It's called the other side, Satan. All of these different names for evil or negativity need to be somehow fixed by Mashiach. And so here in the story, that from this relationship, which again, it's very seemingly strange that this is the way that Mashiach comes into the world. The way it's explained in Kabbalah is that because God made the world balanced between good and evil, that's the whole idea of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, in order to give human beings free choice. And through free choice, the ideal is that we will merit to be in the image of God by making the right choices. Then the human being rises to its divine source and becomes an image of God. So again, here we have the Dead Sea and Yerushalayim. And it represents that Mashiach, it came through very, very strange circumstances. And in a deep way is because the Mashiach has to fix these places. And in a certain way, he can only fix these places if he understands them in the deepest way. Is he going to be able to fix all of this? Now, we mentioned that this Syrian African rift is, in English, we call it the Jordan Valley, Bikat HaYarden, the Jordan Valley. And it's called that because the Jordan River, it begins up there are three sources of the Jordan River. The Don River, the Banyas River, and the Hasbani, the Sneer River. Three different sources of the Jordan. They come together in the Hula Valley, and then they run down to the Sea of Galilee, Yam Kinneret, and from there they go all the way and they empty into the Dead Sea. It runs for about 200 miles, 300 kilometers. But it's from three different sources. The Don provides 50% of the water for the Jordan. 1 second. What? Oh, okay. It provides 50% of the water. For those who have been to Israel, there's a place called Tel Dan. It is such a beautiful place because the Don River flows through this place. And it's fed by, I don't know the number, all these different underground springs. And Tel Dan, they made a path through all the rivulets that are running into the Don River. We go every year. You can never have enough of this place. Tel Dan. There's a kibbutz right there also. And that provides 50%. And it's coming actually from underwater springs that are being fed by the Mount Hermon mountains. The Banyas is the biggest waterfall in Israel. That's not a Hebrew name. In Hebrew, it's called Mapal Hermon. It's called the Hermon waterfall. Banyas is really a foreign word, but it's stuck. And that provides 23% of the water for the Jordan. It comes from the Golan Heights. And the Sneer provides 27% of the water, and it comes from Lebanon. But again, they all come together and they form the Jordan River. Now, how this fits into our spiritual geography, in Hebrew, the word for Jordan is Yarden. From the word Yored, it descends. And so, because that matches the geography, it descends from northern Israel, and it descends from the higher mountains. The water is coming from the higher mountains, and it goes 200 miles until it ends up in the lowest place in the world. So the name Jordan, Yarden, is perfect. But also the last two letters is Dan, which is connected to that's the major source of the Jordan is the Dan River. And the tribe of Dan, which was originally in the Tel Aviv area, they transplanted themselves up north, and they became part of the northern kingdom. And that was the tribe of Dan. So here we see all these different, the name of the tribe, the name of the river, but it's connected to going down. And so here again, we have the Dead Sea area is the lowest place on earth. And it represents this idea of going down. That's what happened to Sodom. They were very, very sinful. And that sinfulness is connected to the lowest place on earth. And yet, paradoxically, mysteriously, it is connected to the birth of Mashiach. This is very, very similar in not the same way, but somewhat similar to the tradition that when is Mashiach born? On Tisha B'Av, when we're literally sitting on the ground. Until noon, we don't sit on chairs. We sit on the ground. It's a fast day. It's called the lowest point of the year. It's the lowest point of the year. That's coming at the end of 3 weeks. A fast day on Yud Zayin B'Tammuz, and then culminating in Tisha B'Av. And so this idea that Mashiach somehow is being born in outside of Sodom, connected to the lowest place in the world, there's a deep, deep, deep connection here. Okay, so now we have to add a different element here. So when you read the story in the Torah, it's clearly an incestuous relationship here. There's no, in the Torah itself, just that the older daughter says that there's no man to come to us. But it doesn't say anything else. Now, when they give Lot wine, it says that he was so drunk, he did not know his daughter's lying down with him or getting up. But on the word getting up, there's a dot. Anyone who has my book, 70 Faces, there's a whole chapter. There are certain words in the Torah that have dots on them, very few. But when there's a dot on the word, it means like look deeper. There's something deeper happening here. So there's this dot on the word kum. And so the sages say, what is that dot doing there? So it says that he was so drunk, he didn't know when his daughter laid down with him, but he did know when she got up. And so the Gomorrah, anyone who's interested, it's in the Gomorrah called Nazir. It's page 23b. If anyone wants to look this up, I'm not going through it straight. I'm going through segments of it. So they said, well, what do you expect from Lot? That like what happened, it happened. Even if he was aware when she got up, it already happened. So they say, no, the dot is there to tell you that he did know when she got up, and therefore he should have been more careful the next night not to drink wine again, because he understood what had happened. And yet he let them give him wine again. He became drunk, and his second daughter slept with him. So you look at this story, and it's just like, okay, it happened. There's no mention of Mashiach. These are all oral traditions. So when you look at the story, it's like what's going on there? So there is a hint there when the daughter says there's no one to come into us. She doesn't say explicitly there's no one left in the world, but the sages understood from this that that's what they thought. That's what they thought. And so the Gomorrah says an astounding thing. And so again, because if you look at the simple story, it's somewhat mysterious why they're going to say this. So what do they say? It says, Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, Gedola avera lishma me mitzvah shelo lishma. He says an incredible thing. He says, greater is a sin that is done for the sake of heaven than a mitzvah that is not done for the sake of heaven. So it's like, whoa, like why is he saying this? And so someone challenges him and says, how can you say that? Leolam yasok adam b'torah u'mitzvot afilu shelo lishma shemitoch shelo lishma ba l'shama. How can you say that? Because we have a principle that even if a person, let's say, learns Torah or does mitzvot for ulterior motives, he may come to do it from the right motives. So better that a person does it maybe with like a big ego or to impress people or to make money or whatever the motivation is, because just the fact that he's doing mitzvot and Torah, the hope is that he will come to do it through the right motivations. So then the Gomorrah says they accept that. Remember, the first statement was greater is a sin done for the sake of heaven than a mitzvah that's not done. So now they change and say, okay, let's say it differently. Let's just say they're equal. Let's just say that they're equal. So why am I bringing this? Obviously, this is a very controversial idea. And it can be totally misinterpreted and misused. But nonetheless, the sages said it. And since they said it, there must be a reason for it. So here, I'm going to go back to the Garden of Eden. Here we see Adam and Eve they only have one commandment. Only one commandment. You can eat from every tree in the garden, but not from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The snake comes and seduces or tricks or fools or sweet talks Eve. But in the Torah itself, many midrashim, but in the Torah itself, his reasoning is the reason God doesn't want you to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, because then you'll be like him, to know the difference between good and evil. And so it's explained, there are many ways to explain this, many. One of them, though, is that in a certain way, her motivation was, I want to be like God. I want to be close to God. I want the wisdom of God. I want the knowledge of God. And she ate. Now, again, there are other ways to interpret it. I'm just giving over this interpretation now, because it's connected to this idea. She did a sin. She did a sin that, according to all of Jewish thought, we're still paying for. All of humanity is still paying for, however we understand symbolically or metaphorically, allegorically, the whole story of Gan Eden. It is the deepest story probably in the entire Torah, because it affects every human being. But in a certain way, she thought her motivation was good. She kind of forgot that God really meant it, that you're not supposed to eat from this tree and that you can't eat from this tree. But for that moment, she, in a certain way, thought that she was doing a mitzvah. So there is a statement from the Kotzker Rebbe that I heard. I never saw it on the inside, but I heard it, that the Kotzker Rebbe said on Yom Kippur, he said, would it be that I was at 1,000th of the level of Eve was when she ate from the tree? And he said this on Yom Kippur. Can you imagine that? Obviously, what was he trying to say? He was trying to say, like, Eve got a bad rap here. Like, there's other ways to understand what her motivation was. And so the reason I'm bringing all this, because if we're learning about Sodom, and we're looking, it's a story in the Torah. We have to deal with it. And we have to deal with what the sages said about it. But in the context that we're trying to understand the spiritual geography of Eretz Yisrael, is that this idea that Mashiach in Gematria equals Nachash, and that the Mashiach is going to have to deal with, in a certain way, the lowest of the low. Now, in our times, there are many in what's called the world of Kiruv, in trying to bring people close to Judaism, people who are very far away, who may have spent their whole life doing all kinds of things that the Torah considers not correct. We should all know that in the last generations, every person who's not raised in Torah is considered as if they're not responsible from a pure Torah aspect for the things that they have done. Why? Because from a Torah aspect, they didn't know better. This is what's called tinok shenishba, a child who was taken captive and raised in a way that they didn't know about Torah. Now, it doesn't mean we're not responsible for things that we do. That's not the point. But what it's saying, I'm just saying from a Torah point of view, they're not like a heretic. They're not like evil because they've been, let's say, captured. They don't know better. And so that's the prevailing view about so many of our generation and people who are considered Bali Tshuva. So they know this very well. It's a very, very real thing that at a certain point, after doing who knows what, a person, let's say, gets turned on to Torah, and then all of a sudden it's like, whoa, what have I been doing all these years? So I'm bringing this up because this idea of, and again, I have to repeat, it's very, very important that no one misunderstands me, because there were different people in Jewish history who used this concept in a very wrong way. Two people who claimed to be messianic figures. One was Shabbatai Tzvi in the 1500s, and then later Yaakov Frank at the time of the Baal Shem Tov. And these two individuals who had learned Kabbalah, they came up with a very twisted, completely anti-Torah philosophy of doing sins with what they thought was a holy purpose. And so they led many, many people astray, especially Shabbatai Tzvi. It was an extremely traumatic period in Jewish history, because many, many, many Jews thought that he was the Mashiach, and the Messianic era was about to dawn. And in the end, he ended up converting to Islam and really shattered the Jewish people. It was very, very traumatic. Many people don't even know about this in Jewish history. But anyone who wants to look up Shabbatai Tzvi, and you'll get the story. And even worse was Yaakov Frank. He was even worse of like I say, sinning, trying to take this statement of the sages completely out of context. So here, this idea of the daughters of Lot, and I brought the idea of Eve. The other example that the Gomorrah brings is of Yael. At the time of when Devorah fought Sisera. This is in the book of Shoftim. For those who were part of our classes on Shoftim, we went through this. Devorah composed a song afterwards. It's one of the 10 archetypal songs. But the enemy was Sisera. And Devorah and the army of Israel was able to defeat him. He runs away, and he runs into the tent of Yael. Now, Yael is married, but she understands this is Sisera. He's running away. We can't let him get away. If he gets away, he will try to get his army back together, and it will be a danger to all of Israel. And so again, you don't see it in the text, but there's a verse there, and the Gomorrah analyzes it, where it says that he fell between her knees and he laid, and there are like 7 verbs like his falling on Yael. And so they learned from this that he had relations with her 7 times. And then when they finished, he passed out. And then she took a tent peg and she drove it through his temple and killed him. And so the Gomorrah brings, this is another example where she was a married woman. But here there was danger to all of Israel if he got away. So again, these are teachings from the sages that are connected to what I'm trying to say here about the spiritual geography, is that we go again from the lowest place on earth, where the lineage of Mashiach comes from, and from that lowest place on the earth, we go to Jerusalem. That's where David HaMelech made Jerusalem the eternal capital of Israel, literally 3,000 years ago. And it has been the eternal capital ever since. From David comes Shlomo, from Shlomo comes Yeruvam, and all of the kings of Israel come from this lineage. And so going back to the Jordan River, again, Yarden, to go down. Well, there's an expression, very, very important expression, called Yerida l'tzorach Aliya, going down in order to go up. And this phrase can be applied in many, many, many different circumstances. But one of them is the whole idea of the soul coming down into a body for the sake of, ultimately, if the soul and the body work together, then when the soul rises up, it rises up to a higher place than it was when it originally came down to the world. Yerida l'tzorach Aliya. Well, here in the spiritual geography, we have the ultimate of Yerida, of going down. The Jordan River running from the mountains of the Hermon. We'll learn more about the Hermon if we don't get it in tonight. All the ways down to the Dead Sea. And then, again, and the last words are Dan, but Dan also means judgment. We didn't say that before. We said Dan is connected to the tribe of Dan. Dan comes from the word judgment, din. And so, obviously, this lowest place on earth represents judgment of sin, judgment of wrongdoing. That's how it became the salt sea. Whatever, like I said, whether it was an earthquake or some kind of miraculous punishment from heaven, however we learn it, there was a lot of judgment there. And that judgment needs to be sweetened. And so now we have the tradition that when Mashiach comes, a river will come out of the temple, and it will run, and the way it's said in the prophets is that it will sweeten all of the waters of the world. But we know that from Jerusalem down to the Dead Sea, there's no you have the Salt Sea in Utah, which is named after the Salt Sea of Israel. But symbolically, the Salt Sea in the lowest place of the earth needs sweetening more than any other place. And so the waters that will come out of the Temple Mount, and anyone who's been in what are called the tunnel, the Western Wall tunnels, will know that there's water down there. It's a real thing, that under the Temple Mount, there is sources of water. And in one place in the tunnel tours, you see a big like pool of water that is natural. It's from under the Temple Mount. And we're told when Mashiach comes that these waters are the waters are the waters of Torah. Ein Torah ela, ein mayim ela Torah. Anytime that the Torah mentions water, it's symbolic of the Torah itself. And so we say, Ki mitzion teitzei Torah. Every time we take the Torah out of the ark in a synagogue, we say, Ki mitzion teitzei Torah. From Zion will come the Torah. And this is talking about it's talking about now, but especially Mashiach, when the wisdom of Torah and the revelation of God will spread to the whole world. So these waters will come and they will sweeten all of the waters of the world. But again, geographically, especially the Salt Sea. Okay, so I want to end with just one more idea. Some of these ideas we might go back to, but I think it really fits in here. As I mentioned, when I kind of did a survey of all the ways from Elat through the Dead Sea, up the Jordan Valley, the Sea of Galilee, the upper Galilee, to the mountains of Mount Hermon. And again, when you're up north and it's a clear day, so Mount Hermon is just, it's like just like the crown on the king's head. It just is, you can see it from every direction, and it has an incredible spiritual presence. So what does Hermon mean? So interestingly enough, and it goes with what we're learning, cherem means when a person is put into cherem, means that they are sent out of the camp. They're sent out of acceptance in Israel. But if you look at the root word of cherem and you permute the letters, it's rachem. It's compassion. So here we have in the same three letters, almost like opposites. You have someone who's been expelled from the Jewish people for various reasons. He's not accepted anymore. On the other hand, the same letters mean rachem. So here we see that the waters of the Jordan are coming from Lebanon and the Golan and Mount Hermon. That's the major source of the waters of the Jordan. And so here we see in a certain way that the Jordan is bringing, and in the future will bring, compassion all the ways down to the lowest places. The lowest places. And then again, that's what we're saying, that Mashiach is coming from these very low places because that is the places that he has to fix, that no one else has been able to fix. And we're talking about like worldwide. He'll be able to fix those places that have led to so much suffering, so much war, so much hatred. Now, one last thing is this word Merachem, which again are the permuted letters of Hermon. When you say Merachem, someone who has compassion, Merachem is Gematria 288. And that number should ring a bell. Those are the two, again, symbolically, these are the 288 vessels that shattered with the light in them from what's called the breaking of the vessels. That in the previous world of Tohu, that the lights were so great, the immature initial vessels of creation could not hold this light, and they shattered. And they shattered into, again, symbolically, 288 fallen vessels and sparks of light. And that Merachem, that is the same gematria as, again, the root of Merachem is connected to Mount Hermon. And so this, in a certain way, kind of brings us full circle to try and understand the spiritual geography of really the whole border of Israel, the Jordan. I mean, today it's the border. In ancient times, we had the other side of the Jordan as well. But again, I want to just clarify again that despite the sages learning this idea of either greater or at least equal, a sin that is done when a person thinks it's for the right purpose is equal to doing Torah and mitzvot for the wrong purposes. Again, it should not in any way be interpreted that it gives the right for anyone to sin. That would be the opposite understanding. But it's trying to understand sin in a bigger context. And that's why I brought in the idea of a Baal Tshuva, that here, and we're told that if a person does tshuva from yira, from fear, they can turn their purposeful sins into inadvertent sins retroactively. But a person who does tshuva from ahava, so they can turn purposeful sins into merits. And so that's really what the sages were leaving, this place that human beings are not perfect. People have their ups and they have their downs. And so sometimes we do things wrong, but we think we're doing it for the right reason. I'll bring in another statement from the sages, which is important. They say that if a person says, I will sin, and then I'll do tshuva. So the sages say that tshuva will not be accepted. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like, well, I'll just sin for the next 10 years, and then I'll do tshuva and everything is taken care of. No, it doesn't work like that. Here we're talking about sins that people are aware that what they're doing at that moment is a sin, not a purposeful sin, lest anyone misunderstand what the sages said or what I'm trying to explain. Here, the only reason I brought that, because how can you talk about Sodom and the Dead Sea from a spiritual point of view and not get into that? But we'll just end with this last idea of Yerida l'tzorach Aliya, going down in order to go up. And so ultimately, I think that is the deep message of the waters of the Jordan running all the way down Israel, from the highest place in Israel to the lowest place. And then going from the lowest place in Israel, the Dead Sea, to Jerusalem. If you'll give me one more minute, I want to read. I want to read from the book of, no, it's not here. Give me 1 second. It's from the book of Micha. It's the 4th chapter. Let's see, verses 1 through 4. I want to read it because I think this is a really beautiful place to like wrap up everything we're trying to say tonight. So this is from the prophet Micha. He says, "And it shall be at the end of the days that the mountain of God's house shall be firmly established at the top of the mountains, and it shall be raised above the hills, and peoples shall stream up onto it. And many nations shall go, and they will say, 'Come, let us go up to God's mount, into the house of the God of Jacob, and let him teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall come the Torah, ki mitzion tetzei Torah, and the word of God from Jerusalem. And he shall judge between many peoples, and reprove mighty nations far off. And they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift sword against nation, and neither shall they learn war anymore. And they shall dwell each man under his vine and under his fig tree, and no one will make them move, for the mouth of the God of hosts has spoken." This is one of the most beautiful, powerful prophecies. And the reason I wanted to read it is especially the beginning, where it says, "And it shall be at the end of the days that the mountain of God's house shall be firmly established at the top of the mountains, and it shall be raised above the hills." And we learned that Jerusalem is 2,700 feet high. But symbolically, it is the spiritual Mount Everest of the world. It is the top of the mountains. And people have been streaming to Jerusalem throughout all of history. And at the end of days, will continue. And from there, not only will the Torah come out, but this stream, which really is the Torah, will come out and sweeten all of the bitter waters. May we live to see it.